Next speaker is Marie-Clarté O'Neill, and she will continue Colette's story.
I'm going to stand, and I speak without notes, so I'll be moving around. And just... Yeah. Okay. As Colette was saying, we need, the first thing we need is an analyzing tool. And we started from the beginning. And in fact, what we thought is that when we've heard Colette about exemplary practice, we are very afraid. We say, how can I do that in my professional work? So we decided to try and work from exemplary practice to better practice, to reflect on how professionals can focus on a process approach rather than on a result. A process approach. We've worked a lot on constructivism ourselves these last days, and that rings a bell to us, the fact that you don't get to a result, you kind of build up something little by little. And for us, reflecting on our international variety, we thought that working on processes would allow us to go to easily adaptations, diverse national situations, diverse institutions, diverse types of audience, diverse programs, all those things you know so well. So how can we now build a best practice process for our own actions? The first thing we thought was that you have to identify what is crucial. You know, we are in professional environments that are so rich, that go to so many directions, that you first have to make an analysis of what is crucial. And then, once you've determined what is crucial, you have to reflect about how do you build something. I mean, our things are not just one shot. A program is going in different places in a museum, for example. So how do you construct that? And then, that means that we have several phases, and that means that we have to have a minute description of each phase, and then an argued justification of everything that we use. Because only that, identifying, constructing, analyzing, makes possible the judgment, moving from what I would say is market of ideas. What are we going to do today? To why did we choose this orientation for this program? So 3 compulsory steps for a best practice project, and you'll see that presented like that, it's not at all terrifying. It's the things you know from your everyday life in museums. 3 steps: conceiving and planning. 2nd step, developing and meeting the public. And 3rd step, which is the one we tend to forget or not have time or energy to do, which is so important, which is evaluating. And we did go even further. You evaluate, but you use your evaluation to finding remedial proposals. That means that you go back to the beginning of the whole process. For each step, of course, there is a number of dimensions to be taken into account, and I cannot in a quarter of an hour explain you that. So what we have done, we have prepared a full document that is the complete analysis of the whole thing. It's there on paper. You may have it at the end of the morning, and it will be downloaded in the new site within the few days, so you'll be able to access it very easily. And so what we're going to do is I'm just going to present you the kind of how do you call that, a spine, you know, of the thing. So the first time is conceiving and planning. First question, why this project? And this one I'm going to leave apart because we're going to go a little deeper later on just on this one. Then, with whom and for whom? And the questions we ask is, what are the beneficiaries, of course? And what are the partnerships? What are the beneficiaries? That seems very easy. I will just give you an example. What reasons do you have to prefer giving 7 workshops in a row to the same group of people, or 7 workshops to 7 different groups of people, of children? This is a hard question. And this is an everyday question for all of us. So that means that with whom, for whom, is just not, you know, deciding like that. It's justifying why, for all these reasons, you prefer doing this or that. Okay, then partnership, you know about partnership. I'll just give a short example of that. We know we want to work with the community. Some museums will work with their inner forces and don't connect with the community to create their things. Some will work a lot with communities. Some will just give the power totally to the outside and not keeping the expertise, strength that they have inside the institution to kind of, you know, work something on. So this is the kind of, so you see that all these things seem very simple, first level, you know, we talk about that all the time, but as soon as you reflect on them and try to argue and justify them, they become extremely difficult. Then aims and objectives, we have talked extensively about that during the conference. Are we looking for experience for our audience? Are we looking for acquisitions, learning, education, whatever, what we said? Then the question of resources. The first one is, of course, very important for most of us right now, finance. But then there is another type of resources that is timing. I was surprised the last days I discussed with people, especially from Croatia, and they were saying how much they use the International Museum Day. This is a timing, you know, this is a timing resource where there is communication that's done outside of your museum around that. So it's a resource. And then we have space. Do we organize our activities inside the galleries or outside the galleries? And is it just a question of it's done like that, or do we do it because we think we get a different educational result by having people working in the galleries or outside the galleries? Does that make a difference? And then content, this is a tricky one. When we decide the content of the program, is it just something that pops out of our head, or do we have a real consciousness of the possible varieties of contents? And then how do we choose? And then how do we construct the content inside our program? Because all that is extremely tricky choices. Then what I call integrating content and means. That means that when we do museum education, for example, we will use oral interpretation and workshop. So how do we choose? Why do we choose a workshop? Is there a link between choosing a workshop and the type of content we're going to give out? And then how do we construct our program? You know, do we start by the workshop? Do we start by oral interpretation? Why are we doing that? Because of the audience, because of the content? You know, all that has to be reflected very heavily upon. And then you see that as soon as conceiving, you see pop up the evaluation process. You cannot decide to evaluate afterwards. You have to plan your evaluation ahead of time, and that raises a number of questions we're not going to touch. That is, what do we evaluate, who evaluates, how do we evaluate, all that type of thing. Second step, I'm going to be a little quicker on that because we've worked a lot on that these last days, which is how do you develop the program, which means how do you prepare the fact that it's going to happen, you know? How do you prepare the technical aspects? How do you prepare the texts? How do you prepare, I mean, all the things you know. And then implementing, leading realization. We didn't want, and I especially didn't want, to have a project building that would be only for the people that kind of project things from their offices, you know, and never take the public right there in the galleries. Because I think this has to be a kind of virtuous chain, you know, from the conceiver to the evaluator, and of course, putting inside everything that was leading the group inside the galleries. And then, and I think that's very important, adapting to reality. Just one little, because it was touched upon during these last days. When you see something that seems strict like that, you think that it's going to make all our programs look the same. And I think that it's not because you decide something strictly that you are not allowed to adapt it to reality, except that you have to be very conscious of what you wanted, how you wanted it and everything, and why you decide to adapt it. It's not just pure inspiration on the spot. I know it looks a little strict, but I think it's a wonderful helper to construct new things and inventive programs. Now, the third step is evaluation, carrying out the evaluation, aims, conditions, tools, researching the data. One thing that's important is hypothesis. You cannot just pile up data and say, now, what do they tell me? You know, what can I get out of that? You have to have your hypothesis, if possible, before, and at the same, but even, you know, you need them to interpret, of course. And then the question of reporting, and I would like to insist on that. A lot of the research that's done in museum education is not shared. It is not shared with the other education professionals, but it is not shared in our institutions. So when we do something, we have to evaluate it because that allows us to present it to the direction board, to whatever, you know, the things you have to share what you are doing, because that gives importance to what you are doing. And then, of course, after that is the difficult part, but the very interesting part. Is the kind of evaluation you did able to give you hints to remediate, which means changing what you were doing into something else? Because like that, you know, we reach the thing that we are looking for with Colette so much. You know, Colette is a researcher, I'm a professional. And when we try to work together, we try to say, you know, how is your research going to serve my professional investment and the way I see my own thing? And so if your research is well done, it will help you remediate, which is rebuilding your program in a different way. So I'm going to go full depth just in one criterion. The criterion is, why do you choose this project? First, what is the origin of the project? Was it a demand? And if yes, is it a demand from the public? Is it a demand from your director? Is it a demand from the mayor of your town? And you know how important that item is. Or did you build it on observations? For example, you know, I see a lot of families in the galleries and we don't organize anything for them. Or would it be intuitions? I think myself, as a professional, that very young children can be led to admire things, paintings done by others. I have this intuition, let me try that. So this is an intuition. And then research results, of course. And circulating ideas. Very often, programs are led on circulating ideas. And sometimes circulating ideas are, you know, they're not fake, they are just not strong ideas, or they are not proved. I'll take one, you know. Let's take care of the children because the children are the adult public of tomorrow. What do we know about that? You know, what do we know? We know so very few things about that. It's such a weak kind of, not opinion, result in a way. Okay, now, justification and relevance. I worked with the national correspondents in Europe in Marie-Clarté for one day on that. And they suffered a little bit, I think, about the question of justification and relevance, and I'd like to have you suffer a little bit too. What do we call, which means, I went too quickly. You know, you have social relevance, institutional relevance, scientific relevance, economic relevance, which means you know that the relevance is what, in a way, gives you the right to do that more than something else. Social relevance. Relation between the project and the social environment in which the museum is inserted. Yesterday, or the day before yesterday, we were discussing about standards, saying that among the standards given to the museums nationally, one was you should take care equally of all the types of publics. What does that mean? What is that idea that you should take care equally of? I mean, this is a political issue. It's not an educational issue. What we think is, should I take care of the whole bunch of society, or should I insist on certain bunch of the society who need it more? Shall I give more to the people that give it more, and perhaps less to the people that give it less? So you see that the question of social relevance goes completely, hits across completely the question of standards that can be given by the states. Institutional relevance, that I think is extremely important. I had a discussion one day with the director of the Louvre, and he was saying, not a discussion, I was hearing him in a conference, and he was saying, sometimes education is seen as the gravy on the roast, which means that the roast is done by institution, an exhibition, for example, and then there is on a nice, always very lively corner of the museum, people that take care of education. And it's always fun, and they're nice people and everything, but in a way they might be a little bit apart from what the core thing of the museum is. And why is it like that? It's because very often education people tend to, what could I say, be very cautious about not being eaten by the object-oriented people, by the science-oriented people. So we kind of, we're against that, we're afraid of that. And so we do not have in the institution, the strong position that we should have if we were inside the institution movement, which means that we have to struggle for that, but also we have to adapt to the main objectives and resources of the institution. For example, relation to the collection. What is the main core of the collection? Are our programs relating to the main core of the institution or not? And you see that, for example, we were talking about very young children, and I was discussing that with some of you yesterday at lunch. When you work with very young children, how do you make the connection between very young children and the core of the collection? Do you have them just painting with food? Or do you have them understanding what they are, in what sort of institution they are, using painting with food for that, you see? So that's getting to the core. Or available professional and scientific expertise. That's important too. We are in expert environments. Do we take advantage of that expertise? Do we kind of plug our educational programs on the institutional expertise? Scientific relevance, that's getting even harder. That means that I have to check whether the information I give in my education program is relevant to scientific information. For example, you work in an archaeological museum. Are you sure that the information you give is up to date? Did you check that with the archaeologists? Or are we still dreaming on, you know, things we learned at the university 20 years ago, you know? So things of that type. And then, even more difficult, relation between the information content of the program and the fundamentals of the related scientific information. What do I call the fundamentals? I take an example in archaeology again. Thank you. No, I'm not going because yes. Shall I, in archaeology, give results of archaeology, or shall I train people to what archaeology is? What is more, you know, essential to archaeology? Archaeology is reading traces of history. This is archaeology. It's better than giving them a date about Neanderthal or whatever. You know, I'm not saying that for yesterday, but just to give you an example. Economic relevance, you'll see that more on my, so just because the use of such a comprehensive tool, I think we've shared it together. You see that it has at the same time an intellectual use and a practical use the same way. And I would like, and that's why I want to keep my last minutes for that, I would like to make such a tool, a kind of methodology use for CECA projects, because if we try and have the same type of language on something that's so much, you know, in our everyday life, then I think we can go further on in exchanging ideas in a deeper way. And I would like to make a proposal, and I ask both Emma and Annie, who is going to receive us in Yerevan next year. I would like, in fact, that a maximum number of you and of the people that are looking to us today to try and build programs using the grid of analysis I gave you, just to see how they respond to what they are doing through that grid. And you see that it's not difficult. It's just very everyday professional things. And then bringing that to Yerevan, either physically, which would be the best, or by sending their projects to one of us, and we will organize that. And then I'd like to have a kind of day of exchange on that, where everyone brings programs analyzed the same way, and then tries, and I'd like, that's an extra demand, tries to focus more on one of the aspects. And then we will organize the day saying, you know, the first day is the questions we have about conceiving the program. And the second half day would be more about, for example, evaluating the program or achieving the program, you see? So that we can kind of decide, we can decide that we can go deeper on certain topics, try to avoid that kind of, you know, speaking of everything that's so very interesting, but I suppose that at the point where museum education is, we want and need to go deeper in certain topics, and we need you and your contribution to do it, and so we expect you in Yerevan next year. So work well, exchange, report, that's my mail address, and but you can send that to any one of us anyway. Thank you very much.